that links you to some of those things, I think.
Let's see, it just says see waiting room. So I guess I have to admit there's a couple students already coming in, but I'm looking for my, wonder if I can do it through my calendar.
I don't know with to Instagram, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I emailed him as well and he accepted. So hopefully, you know, he'll get like a little bell.
Right.
But let's see here if I can copy this somehow. Copy to, no, that's events.
Can you put the link in a text?
I'm going to try that too. I'm going to just, well, no, I don't have his phone number. So let's see here. Paste. Yeah, it let me do it. So, and I want to say that I've, like on personal Zoom meetings that I have on my other account, that I've clicked on Instagram before, so.
Okay.
All right, so I guess I should go ahead and start admitting these people so they don't.
Make me co-host before you start bringing people in, so if I got to swat them down.
How do I do that again? Do I just?
Go up to my name and click on the little drop down there, more.
Co-host, okay.
Yep.
Camera. When he comes in, John, I'm going to have, will you hit record or do I have to do?
He's in right now.
All right, here we go.
There you go.
Okay, mine says recording paused. There we go, we're recording. Hello, Etienne.
Good morning, afternoon.
Yeah, afternoon for us. And John, will you go ahead? Can you do the admittance?
I got it.
Okay. All right. So, Etienne, what we're doing here is we do a special guest speaker every Friday. We call it either the Green Hour in Columbus or Wake, Bake, and Educate in Cleveland. And since we're all online now, we're kind of a combined campus. And so we've been doing some Zoom meetings to bring in special guests. And you are our special guest on Friday today. So what I thought I would do, I had already kind of copied your bio from, I think it was LinkedIn. So they do have a general idea of your background, but you have such an interesting story. I thought maybe it would be great, and let me go ahead and turn on my video, sorry. I thought it would be great for you to start off maybe from right when you got back from the Gulf War and how you got into cannabis and you know, how it furthered into your advocacy work and things like that. So welcome, Etienne.
Well, thank you so kindly. It's great to be here, Lisa. I appreciate your invitation. Hi, everybody. My name is Etienne Fontan. I am the co-owner of Berkeley Patients Group, as well as New Leaf in Nevada. And I basically sustained injuries where I had my knee destroyed during a combat situation. And when I was evacuated, I was evacuated to Germany. And when I was going through rehab in Germany, I had a military major suggested I try hashish, of which I laughed at him and thought he was crazy and, you know, full of it, etc. And then, of course, once I started to realize that, oh, this is for real, I started asking questions and none he could answer. I was on morphine at the time, so I wanted to get off morphine. I was an artist, so I enjoyed drawing and being artistic. And morphine is great if you want to sit there and drool all over yourself, but it is not conducive for the type of art that I enjoy doing, because I put myself through art school with the GI Bill. So upon coming back to the United States, it was a very challenging time, needless to say, coming back from combat and reassessing into society. I moved out to California to be in a band. And while I was out here, my roommate stole everything I had. And I came home with a High Times magazine and I sat in a corner with the only light in the house. And as I was flipping through this High Times, I was realizing that I just came from the store, and the guy literally just cut it off the top, and it was next month's version. And I was flipping through there, I realized all the articles were about 4 to 6 months behind. And I was, wait a second, if it's 4 to 6 months behind, then shit's happening now. Ooh, let me find out where shit's happening now. Well, this is, of course, pre-internet, and it happened fortuitously that the Cannabis Action Network, which was a group that was started by Debbie Goldsberry and various other activists, had been working with Jack Herrera and decided that they were doing all the work. So they decided to form their own organization and go out and do things called the Cannabis Action Network. And they had just moved to California, and I walked by their booth when they were flyering for a event. And I went and was blown away because the speaker there was Dr. Todd McArea, who, if you aren't familiar with, he wrote a very large compendium called the Medical Marijuana Papers, which is a compilation of all the research done by the federal government. He had worked with the government and was a researcher and doctor. So he was fascinated by my Gulf War syndrome and wanted to study it along with cannabis. So we struck up a conversation, and Debbie said, we need volunteers to show up tomorrow to make phone calls. And I volunteered along with 5 others, and the next day came and I was the only one there. So it was one of those things where I found a way to plug in, and I started to the first event we did was the 50th anniversary of LSD in San Francisco in 1993, April 13th, actually. So that anniversary just came by. And I basically worked the front door and would meet everybody in the psychedelic as well as cannabis movement in one day. And then I would spend the next 30 years reading about the people that I had met or meeting and conspiring with them. So I basically was brought on as a volunteer for the Cannabis Action Network, where we received no pay, but they covered a place to live, which we lived in a group home. And I spent the next 2 years doing rallies, teach-ins, and tours in 47 U.S. states, where they gave us the support. We went out with 2 6-foot tables. We had, back then, we had T-shirts with the "Did you know" facts from an awesome guy out in Ohio. And we used to sell grow books, because back then people were afraid they might end up on a list if they ever ordered that stuff.
Right.
Where now it's a reality, but back then the paranoia was very real. So we had a brisk sales of, needless to say, grow books, as well as we carried The Emperor Wears No Clothes by Jack. And on top of that, we had hemp products from patches to twine. Then we had literature and information about cannabis facts. And then we usually had a little hemp museum with actual representations of cloth, hemp plastics, hemp wood, so that people could physically touch and look at these things. So when we were on tour, it was visual as well as, touch were very exponential in making people come around. But I had the fortune of traveling with one of the women who receives marijuana from the United States government. Her name is Elvie Muzica. And as we know, or have learned, the United States government has been growing at the University of Mississippi since the 60s and has been providing it to people who had the cojones to sue the federal government. Where Elvie she basically went blind in one eye and was busted in Florida for marijuana, and then found a huge community outpour of love and support. So she felt empowered and sued the federal government, and after 12 years won the right. So she traveled around with me for 2 years with her little tins of 300 joints, which are delivered every month by the DEA. And to have her and traveling around places like Ohio, West Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, a former mother of two, well, she still has kids, a mother of two who had to sue the government to have her medical marijuana. And she was my teacher and guide, as well as an amazing arrow to shoot through prohibitions, lies, and misinformation. So everywhere we went, and when you show the cops, et cetera, everybody, your legal tin of 300 joints, it tends to sway things a little bit. So she would basically tell me I was doing speeches. She would tell me, kid, don't curse. You're saying bad things. You're going to incite a riot. You're going to get in trouble. So she told me right things and really helped wean me down. And so for me, it became a direct action in the darkest days because I was a pre-215. Proposition 215 was the law here in California. I was a pre-215 patient. So for me, I got tired of making criminals out of my friends to have my medicine. So I got active, got involved. And then when I would go to the VA and discuss my medical marijuana use, I would basically be blackballed, physically removed by security for mentioning my cannabis use, because now I was considered a known drug user.
Right.
Prior to us changing the laws semi at the federal level, any use of any other substance outside of the pharmacopoeia that they issue you, you're considered a known drug user and considered persona non grata. I lost all my benefits and literally physically removed from 4 different VA facilities. From that, one Berkeley Patients Group and other dispensers has started in the late 90s after Prop 215 passed in 1996. We basically found ways to change the laws, basically go by the initiative route, because we knew that we could not get any type of governor or legislature or representatives to take this forward. So fortunately, we live in California, where west of the Mississippi, the initiative process is still number one. And by taking it to the people, we got laws passed, such as 215. Then after that, we tried Prop, it's not 64, prior to, I can't think of the exact number. We failed in 2012, basically, 2010, 2012. 2010, because once we failed there, then Colorado successfully became in 2012. So we realized we had some momentum and we lost by few thousand votes initially. So that emboldened Colorado and Oregon to realize, hey, if California can almost do it, I wonder if we can heavy lift this. Oh, pardon me, Washington, not Oregon.
Right.
And then they did that lifting and changed the aspects forever. For me, I've always been a cannabis activist as well as a educator. Because there was no information, and I had my own self-education by traveling, as well as after I was with Cannabis Action Network, I worked for Steve D'Angelo, importing and exporting hemp out of Eastern Europe. The company was called Ecolution. So we made hemp jeans, we did the first hemp Adidas shoes, and we were the ones importing all the hemp twine that people were making all their necklaces, jewelry from. So I got to do business with large scale companies from Walmart all the way down to the small mom and pop stores. So I got a radical education regarding industrial hemp growing, importing, exporting, securing seeds, transporting from, field to actual manufacturing, to from twine, then twine sent to making it to jeans, et cetera. So it was quite a education, but at the same time, our business helped fund other organizations. And so when I got involved with the various dispensaries, I started originally when I got divorced in '99, and I moved out to from LA. I moved to Northern California, leaving Ecolution behind. And by that time, all my friends had started dispensaries. And since I had been a trusted person, they knew I could handle money as well as responsibility. I found myself behind the scenes. I helped build the Bulldog, the original Bulldog by Richard Lee. It was a Ethiopian restaurant that had been abandoned for a year and a half. And right after I moved to California, Rich is like, look, kid, it's an ugly job. There's rats and it's nasty, but if you clean it out, I'll pay you. So that was literally my first job, being paid to clear out the restaurant that became the Bulldog, which became the first, sort of legal, quasi illegal dispensary in the United States, as well as I worked with Oaksterdam and various others. I was a teacher at Oaksterdam, as I taught procurement, so basically how to transport your cannabis to me as a dispensary, how to do it properly, secure your vehicle, make sure all the lights are working, all these different situations that are pretty much common sense, but necessarily need to be, explained to people so that they can prepare themselves dealing in the drug war, and what the drug warriors are looking for, so that you can protect yourself and you can get to me and back to me in the future. So we learned early on there was a lot of need for education because of absence of education outright. So we had to either provide it, then we had to provide the materials, we had to provide the knowledge. And fortunately that changed, because back when I first started, the only two publications out there were High Times Magazine and The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And I literally did my English 101 paper on those. And my professor was like, kid, you need more than 2 references for periodicals. I was like, that's all that's out there, Doc. You gotta understand, the only things out there is High Times in this reference book. And he understood and was really cool about it. And so cool that he invited me to a party of which I sold him weed. So, that's how I got through college, people, because I was a weed dealer, because the GI Bill only pays your tuition. I was in art school, so I was a printmaker and lithographer, and I had to do a run, 5 different runs during a semester, and usually 25 pages each on huge 18 by 24 archival pieces of paper. That shit's expensive. Back then it was $3 a sheet. And if I had to do a run of 25, I had to do a run of 50 to come out with those 25s, because we're doing old school on block printing using stones. So I learned early that if I was selling weed, I could make money more than just smoking weed, as well as I could sell enough weed that I could get free weed. So I learned economics. I also learned the metric system, because, as we learned, nothing is in traditional, weights and measures in the drug world. For some reason, we actually adopted the thing that America can't seem to figure out. So the metric system has been our friend, and we still use it today, from eighths to grams to, kilos, etc. So it's rather funny how we did mix between pounds, and because you'd sell pounds and you have to break it down from the kilo price, basic economics. So the realities were, when I first moved out here, there was no place to get weed. There was no access. I used to have to, when I first moved here, I worked as a night manager at an ice cream parlor, and I would close it at 10, be out of there by 10:30, have to run to the train station, which was literally a mile away, catch the train going to San Francisco. Well, first I have to catch the transfer, then the train, then get up to San Francisco, then get off there, catch either the 5 or the 72 bus, all the way up to the top of Haight Street, because back in the day during the Grateful Dead shows, the Deadheads would hang around the Ben and Jerry's on the corner of Haight and Ashbury, and they were always selling weed. So if you wanted to go down, you could, but it was street weight. This was an eighth, this was a quarter, this was 3/4, that was an ounce, 4-finger ounces back in the day. And sometimes you did a little better. Usually your weight was short, but I would then score that, throw it in my bag, and take that transfer, catch the last train to the East Bay, catch the last train toward my house, and then walk 2 miles home. And so that's how I used to score my weed. And needless to say, the dangers, I was ripped off. I got crappy weed. It was never tested. So there is a lot to jumping into this cannabis world that I didn't necessarily realize all the different levels. And needless to say, after 30 years of doing this, I'm still learning.
Absolutely. And, it's kind of an interesting story how you ended up, getting involved with BPG and, how that all formed from Prop 215 to today, and how it has changed and, of course, expanded. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the differences now as far as when you first started to today in dispensary ops?
Well, we're now legal. Back when I first started, we were illegal. Prop 215 allowed for medical gatherings as well as to give away cannabis. Dispensaries were not legal in
Right.
no way, shape, or form. So we had to literally do direct action as activists. Back then, we only hired activists because we were expected to be arrested every day. And so you couldn't hire your average person that had kids and said, hey, I'm sorry, as much as you want to be here, can you handle going to jail and having your kids taken by CPS? So that's realities that caused us to necessarily shift focus to, being on the front lines. So back then we were always, we had phone trees in case that we were busted, so that everybody had a specific person that they had to call, that they could activate the lawyer, activate the activists to come out, activate people to come out with signs, et cetera, et cetera. It was very much a very much tight knit and very much easy to communicate with each other because we were all looking out for each other. We learned early on from Amsterdam that the coffee shops got together, lobbied together, and worked together. So we took from their example early on and realized that we have to be united. And it's stronger if we go together and lobby united than if we just hang separately. And from that, we found very willing lawyers. We found very willing early on when we were doing things like this, we would tell people to find their i.e. radical city council member, start supporting them, become friends with them, do their phone trees, start actively participating in your democracy. Totally different from the hippie idea of concept of what we'd come from, which was fuck authority, stay away from it, et cetera, et cetera. I learned early on that we need to put on suit and ties. And in fact, the first time I went lobbying in Washington, D.C. was with Dr. Todd McCurria and Dennis Perrone. And needless to say, holy shit, that was a real learning experience to actually, I watched Dennis walk into, back then it was Senator Waxman's office. And Senator, we're saving your ass in San Francisco. You bet your sweet ass, Dennis, you certainly are. And hearing this come out of my jaw, hit the ground because I'm like, this is how it's done? Are you fucking kidding me? And there it was right in front of me. They were sitting there bullshitting, using profanities, everything I was taught not to do in Civics 101. And it was cordial, got through what we needed to, and we moved on to the next person. And I realized that even my voice could be heard and mattered. And I realized that I could empower others to do the same. So we encouraged that. And over time, as state laws started to change, an actual Senate bill called SB, by accident, 420, was the one that became the bill that allowed for dispensaries in California. Now, you still didn't have a medical defense. I still didn't have a medical defense federally. So that's why Berkeley Patients Group, when it was founded, specifically chose the name Berkeley Patients Group for in case we were arrested and we went through a jury trial, the jury would hear the name Patients every single time. And we would hope that that would actually change minds and concepts and ideas when they decide whatever our fate was going to be. Because again, we were always expected to be arrested. We never expected to arrive at the 20-year anniversary we just touched at in last October. So the challenges were large, as well as the cards were very much stacked against us from the beginning. But by plugging in locally, we stayed in communication with our city council, as well as our chief of police. We made them aware of what we were doing. We wanted them to understand that we were not people hiding. And against our lawyers' wishes, we kept papers of everything that we did, of all of our transactions. We wanted to prove to a jury of our peers that we were doing everything legally. We were doing everything above the board, which was... none of our lawyers were like that in any way, shape, or form. They were like, "You're being stupid, kids," you know, and we outlasted it, oddly enough. Our organization, Berkeley Patients Group, when my good friend, I worked for and was a director for Ed Rosenthal's grow operations. Ed Rosenthal is a premier writer on grow books. And right after I worked for Rich at the Bulldog, Ed hired me because he heard how good my weed was. So I ran his operations for a while. And I left him in 2001 and went to work for BPG because my friend Debbie was like, they lost one of their owners, one of the original founders, Jim McClellan, was an AIDS patient. And we weren't aware that he had created BPG to be his transition point. After he had passed and Debbie asked me to come on, I couldn't say no. I actually started off in the cultivation, and their cultivation in San Francisco was a shit show. It was basically a powdery mildew factory. It was in a foggy part of town, and there's nothing I could do to rectify that situation without literally $1 million. So I basically got hired and was like, "You can't grow shit here, people." And they were, needless to say, not too happy with me. But, you know, that was my honest assessment. I could have continued to grow, but I would have grown substandard stuff that was covered in white powdery mildew. Nobody wants that.
Right.
So when I got then hired inside, but during that time in 2002, Ed Rosenthal was arrested by the feds for, growing marijuana. And they tried to, he was convicted to 1 day initially. And unfortunately, Ed had written my phone number on the wall of the grow room the week before the feds busted in. And so they found my phone number on his wall. And so for the first trial, I heard there was a subpoena and somehow they couldn't find me twice. And he was convicted for 1 day, sentenced to 1 day, and that was it. Well, Ed unfortunately went out and then started cursing and belittling the prosecutor who had just prosecuted him, which left a bug in the crevice of this said prosecutor. And a couple years later, they prosecuted Ed back in, well, this would have been 2006, 2007, because while I was working at BPG, DEA showed up to actually serve me to actually be in the Ed trial. I was subpoenaed for a grand jury, of which you do not get the luxury of your lawyer. You have to sit in a room of 36 people and a judge and a prosecutor, all looking at you. And that's where I declared my 5th and 10th Amendment rights, that, we are, our own little laboratory here, and I'm not going to convict my friend and put him in jail because they wanted a kingpin charge on him, which should have given him life in jail.
Wow.
So my friends and I decided that we were not going to, and we became the In the spring of 2007, we became the Recalcitrant Seven. We were actually put on trial in federal court for refusing to prosecute or for refusing to testify against Ed Rosenthal. And Judge Breyer, the actual brother of the Supreme Court judge, was the actual judge in the case. And he actually thanked us for how respectful we were in the court and delivering our Fifth and 10th Amendment and excused us. We were convicted, but we were never charged. And we were sent home because the judge realized that if he put us in jail for contempt of court, we would spend more time in jail than Ed Rosenthal for his one day. And he stated at that point, so if you're going to testify against Ed, let us know and you'll go to jail for the weekend. But if you're not, then come back on Monday, because one of us hadn't actually testified yet. And then on Monday, when that other person did the same thing we did, the Fifth and 10th Amendment, then they again sentenced Ed to one day, and that was it. So needless to say, I've been through the legal ringer and understanding along the way. And during that time around, that's when SB 420 happened, and we were allowed to be more legal. But when Ed was arrested, we've decided to form an organization called Americans for Safe Access. We got tired of meeting up in elevators and going to arraignments of our friends being arrested. So we started to form different organizations, and BPG and others took our profits, and we always made ourselves very profitable so that we could take those profits and donate and create these organizations and support them. We supported Normal, we supported CAN, we supported pretty much every MPP, every major organization out there. We've supported and put our money where our mouth is, because we realize that prohibition is going to continue unless we do something about it, and our dollars and our money actually make real differences. And from that, you've seen these organizations become national, international. And when, Prop 64 happened a few years ago, we realized that we were legal as medical, but at the same time, we were always, and I've always been in this to make freedom for everyone possible. We realized that Proposition 264 is a good idea. It wasn't perfect. Same thing like Prop 215. It was a good idea, but it wasn't perfect, but we still passed it. So I consider those lines in the sand. And even with the passage of 64, that brought on a whole new regulatory reality. Now, I'm going to phase back again a bit, because about 11 years ago, I bought some cannabis that I smoked, and I got an upper respiratory infection. From that upper respiratory infection, I realized that I am dealing with cancer and AIDS patients. And through what we considered our organoleptic testing, where we do our sight, sound, smell, look under a microscope, etc., we missed something. We missed something majorly, microbiology. So I started to reach out to find out about testing. And we could not get any information because it was tied to going back to that University of Mississippi, which actually grows marijuana for the United States government. They also hold all the testing and do all the testing for the United States government. And they will not release their standards. So we had to literally reinvent the standards. I had to take the wheel and reinvent it. So I found the producer and the tester for the Dutch cannabis, and the guy who actually makes the testing solution for the Dutch government, and brought him to the United States, and BPG started our own funding of testing of cannabis. Of which we were able to initially come up with THC. It was I'm a printmaker. I'm in artillery, so I didn't know science, so I had to learn it. And needless to say, we had to come up with a methodology to where we could not get cannabis into an actual laboratory. We had to come up with extraction solutions, because if cannabis is found in a laboratory, it's $10,000 fine per test.
Wow.
Yeah. So we created, working with after researching about 10 different solutions, we found a solution to suspend the full cannabinoids, which turned out to be 100% alcohol. We tried naphtha and various other extractions. But we found when we ground the cannabis, then put it in alcohol, agitated it for 1 minute, and then took a pipette and extracted it, we then had the exact solution and all the cannabinoids suspended. So then the laboratories could actually deal with it in the sense of using a gas chromatograph, which actually ignites a sample, and then UV-HPLC, which uses ultraviolet light to actually break down the every chemical structure in a compound, period, end of story, without the ignition. So we were able to come out and find THCA, whereas if we ran through the gas chromatograph, we would get THC, because again, it's burning. So they turned it from the acid into the THC. Then a few months later, we started to get some cannabis was causing a secondary spike. I'm talking very rare strains. And when we started to reference, we then went to Dr. Meshulam. Dr. Meshulam was the Israeli researcher who actually discovered officially isolated THC in 1963 in Jerusalem. We started to look through his papers and we found that exact secondary spike. And it was exactly where it was supposed to be. And that's what brought us that compound that we now all know as CBD. So he had discovered CBD also in 63, but he tossed it aside, thinking that THC was the entourage effect, which brings everybody to the party. What it turns out, it's more of an ensemble effect, in my opinion. Where it's it's all these compounds working together in unison, as opposed to somebody bringing everybody else to the party, of which I've actually talked to Dr. Meshulam about, and he still wants to stick with his nomenclature. So be it. But Dr. Lester Grinspoon has actually adopted my nomenclature, and I am actually published in Dr. Lester Grinspoon's book, Marijuana, the Forbidden Medicine, in 1997. I am PTSD in the book. So you can read about, he allowed all of his patients to write anonymously our medical situations, and then he documented in the book. So yeah, that was fun to tell my mom, hey mom, I never got a degree, but I'm published by Harvard and Yale Press. What do you think of them apples? Which, yeah, it's pretty cool. I'm not going to deny it. So I've taken my own personal documentation to do my best that I can use my history to help people and promote the plant and be an advocate. And we've been fortunate along the way that due to my pioneering in testing, we've forced the city of Berkeley then to allow the others dispensaries to make them do the same thing of testing. And then a few years later in 2016, when we passed the law 464, which became official law in 2018, that allowed for adult use sales. So medical was still going to continue, still going to be allowed. It's just now we were going to be able to allow adults 18 and over. And when that happened, needless to say, it was a relearning. Because we were inundated by a whole bunch of people that had not seen the patients, the previous 18 years of products developed and et cetera, what they are. They had only heard about these or seen them in magazines or saw a friend flash an actual, empty container of what they were. So for them to actually now to come in and it was overwhelming for people. So it took a lot of time. We spend a lot of time. You spend a week actually learning before you actually hit the floor at BPG, because there's a lot to learn regarding cannabis. Yeah. But we also see a lot of genetics. So we keep books like all the Cannabibles, the Great Book of Buds 1 through 4, of which I'm actually in book 4, actually doing my research and doing extraction at BPG. Ed actually documented that back in 2009 or something like that. Basically, the information that's out there, some of it's proper, some of it isn't proper. It gave people a better understanding about what they were handling and dealing with. We see on average of 800 to 1,000 people a day. So needless to say, we go through a lot of cannabis as well as different varietals. So people get up to script pretty quickly because of the diversity they're dealing with, as well as the personal touch that we've always strived for, because I always wanted that one-on-one encounter. It's still done one-on-one. People have fears, questions, and they just want honest answers. So that's all we do and try to provide, open and honest as best as we can. And we have science that has helped us show where things are properly, as well as a lot of our anecdotal talk has been found to be sound via science over the years. Back when we were originally starting, they were saying, oh, y'all are just doing that to get high. But when I first saw a MS patient with mass spasticity take a hit off a joint and within 9 seconds stop going through their tremors and shaking, that's all we needed back then. That's all we needed to know. We knew that it worked. There was no way this wasn't a medicine in one way, shape, or form. And thankfully, researchers found some things that have backed us up, and other things still need to be researched. So if you're sitting here now watching us, you know, there's still decades of research that have to be done on this plan. And we need you. We need you to learn how to do the things properly, and so that other researchers and doctors can learn what we're doing. So as patient advocates, they've actually come to, we've been inundated by doctors, researchers. I was very fortunate to have a doctor in my employ for a while, Dr. Amanda Ryman, and she did the first study out of dispensaries, which is on alcohol and cannabis use, and finding quite a few people were supplementing that alcohol use with cannabis. And that was replicated again in Canada, and I think replicated in Europe. So her study was found to be sound, and unfortunately in 2012, the government forcefully evicted BPG from its location because we were found to be property to property line, or as the crow flies, 984 feet from a private French school. Whereas if you walked it back in the day, it was over 1,000 feet. So the government went to our bank and said that if you do not evict them, we're going to take your bank.
Wow.
Now, what we had learned was via the Steve D'Angelo's Harborside case, which they had been prosecuted before us, their lawyers asked the judge, well, why are they evicting us as opposed to what they've done in the past, which is kick in our doors and arrest us all? And the DEA stood up and said, well, it's 6 months past 5 years, Your Honor. And that made us realize that a clock had started years ago, and the government has 5 years. They got 5 years to prosecute your ass. If it passes 5 years in one day, they can't seat a jury. Well, Harborside had just been found to be just past 5 years, and we're 7 years older than them.
Right.
So that's why they basically forcefully evicted us. They couldn't arrest us. They couldn't actually kick in our door because we've been active in doing, and they knew what we were doing. And our lawyers found that they've been knowing what we've been doing for decades, plus that they couldn't do that. So we were forced to shut down. We turned into a delivery service, and within 5 months, I found a new location, which was basically dirt and a shell of a building, and we rebuilt that into the current BPG, which we 6 months after being evicted, we opened up our new location December 12th, 2012 at 2366. And then the government came after us saying that now we were within 1,000 feet of a daycare center and preschool. So against my lawyer's wishes, we sued the feds. Everybody said we were going to lose. But inadvertently, when I said we created that organization called American for Safe Access years ago, well, Americans for Safe Access found a sponsor called Dana Rohrabacher and started this thing called the Rohrabacher Amendment. Well, the Rohrabacher Amendment basically states that the federal government cannot spend money in states where there is legal medical cannabis. It failed 8 times before it actually passed and became a rider. And this, during my time while I was fighting the federal government, which was from 2012 to 2016, that rider stood. That organization that we created, Americans for Safe Access, created that law that became passed. And in the end, The Obama administration that came after me threw in the towel. And because they could not afford to seat anybody in a court, we won our case and we won our right to exist, because preschools and daycare centers are not part of the law.
Right.
So we had to prove it. And this is the reality: is you have to fight for your rights. You have to fight for your rights constantly. We just had to fight for our rights with what just happened and why we're open right now. We are all in the midst of wallowing in a pandemic. And if you would have told us 2 months ago that we would be all deemed essential in a pandemic, none of us would have taken that bet. Nobody would have taken that money. We would have said, you're crazy. But ladies and gentlemen, this is what a 20-year overnight success story looks like. This is 20 plus years of activism and fighting. This is 20 plus years of staying in contact with our local city and state. So when that happened, we called our mayor and he said, absolutely, you guys should be open. Let's get the city council on this. Then we lobbied the city council, and the city council said, yes, you can exist. And then we contacted the Bureau of Cannabis Control in Sacramento, and they said, your city says you can exist, you can exist. And from this, other states were like, well, if California can do it, you're now essential too. So here we are sitting today. We are open. We're going to be open for 420. We are open as a delivery service. We're open as a pickup location. So you can place your orders online, have your menu online, which it is. And we're telling people to stock up for 420 because we're promoting an event called the Great American 420 Session.
Yes.
Which is going to be online. And we've got Be Real from Cypress Hill, Tommy Chong, and various other guests who are going to entertain you. We wanted to figure out a way. Originally, we were going to do a 420 sesh with me and Q&A, and others were trying to figure out, since we were all, in the same boat. It actually started on Hash Church a couple of weeks ago, where Debbie and I were on, and she was like, why don't we do something for 420? I was like, well, why don't we do something like a telethon? And we took it and we found promoters and that idea and concepts, where we worked together with and found another 5 or 6 dispensaries. And now we're going to be on Twitch, I do believe, live. I will be interviewed sometime between noon and 1 on 420. We're doing it from 11 to 6 PST, where we're encouraging everybody to stock up beforehand, order your cannabis, be safe, stay safe, keep your social distancing. And we wanted to entertain people on 420 to keep them from lining up. You have to understand, I've had lines around the blocks on 420. I've seen 1,800 people on a 420. Okay. Right. So we're encouraging people to stay home. Don't come to us. Don't inundate us. Celebrate. Here's a way to celebrate. So we gave them and provided them with an opportunity and a chance. And we had awesome promoters and people who are pushing and adding to it every single day. So all we're doing is, and we're donating that money to first responders. My sister's a nurse on the front lines and various others, and we know they're struggling. So we found nonprofit organizations that support doctors and nurses and EMTs, and that's what we're doing, as well as we're going to be offering discounts to doctors and nurses and EMTs, because damn it, if they don't need some cannabis after the shit they're going through, I don't know who the hell does. You know what I'm saying? I fortunately, when I was in my war, I scored hashish in Saudi Arabia. So I had some hash to cope with what I was going through. And needless to say, it helps beyond measure. So we want to encourage people to stay home, stay safe, and sesh in on 420 for this year. And as things change, hopefully we'll be able to gather again next year for 420. But until then, we need to stay safe, stay smart, and not endanger anyone else. It's not about us. We're helping each other. We're trying to protect the sick, the elderly, and the old, and the infirmed. And that's what we deal with at BPG. So we're doing everything that we can to actually do everything positive. But we've also had the positive reinforcement from the BCC. So we have a state organization, such as when we needed to open for delivery, we were able to write them. They told everybody, if you write and ask us what you want to add to your permit, we'll do that. Don't do it after the fact and get caught. Ask. So we have asked for delivery. They gave us delivery. We asked for pickup. They allowed pickup. Then right afterwards, the city decided to shut down pickup. It turns out that Berkeley is the only city in California that has its own health department. And the health department is full of wonderful old white ladies who have been basically winning on everything having to do with tobacco. Mm-hmm. Every anti-tobacco law basically started there from these ladies. So they're used to having victory after victory. Until we showed up, and we started to hand them some L's, and we just handed them an L where we found a new location for Berkeley Patients Group, and we're moving into a former pet store it'll take about a year for us to build out. But we wanted to also reopen our smoking lounge. We previously in our old location had a lounge for the first 11 years where people were allowed to come in and smoke. And we found especially those that were in federal housing or in federal situations needed a safe place for them to medicate, because they can't safely medicate in federal housing. They'll get kicked out. They'll lose their house and everything. It's not kind. It is cruel, and we've seen it happen. So we wanted our lounge. So in January, we actually had to lobby our city and have city council meetings. And our largest opposition was the city health department. They didn't want smoking of any kind. We told them we were going to put in air scrubbers. We're not smoking tobacco. It's cannabis. Didn't matter. They were just adamantly against it. So we won. We flipped more city council members than they did, and they were not happy. So when they heard that we were open, they pulled some dirty pool and actually got the city to allow everybody else can do curbside but cannabis. And so we activated our networks, got active again. And this is why everybody, it's very important to stay in ultra contact with your city council, your city attorney, as well as your mayor. And the mayor basically told us, you got to turn 5 city council members. So we activated every dispensary in Berkeley. We worked together. And at that time, the state authorized us for delivery. So I could have just been delivery only. But along with others, we decided to fight for everybody's right for curbside delivery. So we banded together, and we flipped 5 city council members within 24 hours and the mayor, and they acquiesced, and we were allowed curbside. So even during this pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, you have to stay eternally vigilant at your local level, because we had them play this dirty pool on us, and we were able to flip it. But if we didn't show up in force, that wasn't going to happen. And we're seeing what happens in Santa Clara County, a few counties south of us. In San Jose, they actually stopped curbside because somebody decided they didn't like it, and they do not have the access to the city council member and the mayor and the constant communication to the levels where they can actually flip their people. So they don't have the luxury, and we're working on petitions and other things, but this is the reality of playing catch up as opposed to walking hand in hand together. Right. And I cannot tell you how important it is. Look, it's scary. It's intimidating, not gonna lie. But if you want to be in this is the realities you have to walk in being pioneers. There's no pathway. We're the ones walking it, and there's people following us. A lot of people are following everywhere that we go. So be smart, be intelligent in how you operate, and be above board at all times. We're seeing now, the FBI has been involved and are busting all kinds of people around the country that have been doing bribes and trying to bribe city council members or people to try to counties to get them to get their selection ahead of time. So it's a very frustrating world to navigate. We've also because we've become legal in so many different states now, there's industry. There's a whole industry now. We were just a cottage industry. We were just local people helping each other, patients growing or making products that were not out there dietarily or to their specific dietary needs. And from that, those were all the medications that we had prior to 64. And unfortunately, when 64 passed, over 80% could not make that leap. Over 80% did not put money aside, did not have investors, did not come with SOPs, did not prepare, and fell and were lost along the wayside. And I lost some fucking great products and great vendors along the way. And people are still coming in asking for those products. And now we're seeing multi-state operators. We're seeing quality products, quality tested products, quality consistent products. On top of that, we've seen new things like CO2 and distillates come out, which allow for flavorless edibles that are potent. Whereas prior to that, we were dealing with chlorophyll cannabis, because alcohol extraction and a taste of cannabis, as we all know, that's absolutely shitty. And nobody likes that. We put a lot of sugar and a lot of flavor to try to overpower that, that cannabis chlorophyll flavor. And it wasn't really accomplished until post-legalization, with thanks to Colorado and others finding CO2 as an extraction methodology, finding BHO and various other types of concentration extractions. We've seen new types of, hashes, from, water hash to rosin, which is the most recent discovery, where you're actually taking and squishing cannabis at temperature and taking out the lipids and the waxes together, giving a whole kind of a cannabis extract, whereas opposed to CO2 or BHO extraction pulls out the THC and some of the terpenes, whereas CO2 destroys all the terpenes for the most part. So it is very much flavorless, et cetera. So we're still learning from, industrial methodologies of production. On top of that, we now can deal with the 3M of foods. Prior, BPG used to have its own line of edibles back in the early teens, and the problem that we had was the flavor of the chlorophyll. So I reached out to like 3M and other food laboratories, and they're like, yeah, we can deal with your recipe without the cannabis and deal with that. Right. Fine, but we're not patients, so we can't accept cannabis. And we're like, well, the problem is the cannabis. The cannabis is the flavor, the flavonoids, and the flavor that's ruining everything. So it's kind of moot. So we had to applaud, and we let that go, because then we had saturation problems. If I made a cookie that's this big, maybe the oil and butter that we use maybe is saturated over here, so it's not necessarily spread out evenly throughout the cookie. Mm-hmm. So that's what we also learned, is titration, specific dosing and dosing. These were huge problems prior to 64. But now with food companies coming in and doing proper food laboratory use, as well as dietary supplementations and all the things that have to be printed, we have experts from and varieties of food and drink that we would have never had prior to 64, and things that are still coming down the pike. Because companies are coming and growing. There's also been consolidations. Post 64, some people barely made it to the legal standpoint and couldn't afford to take it forward or to stock large orders to have people. I could get a lot of small orders from people, but I couldn't get large orders to sustain necessarily the things that I needed at the time. So there's been lots of changes along the way, and incremental changes that have brought us to currently where we are, where we stock about 400 to 600 SKUs of legally tested product. Prior, we used to deal individually with the farmers. So my growing experience was exponential when somebody would come in and say, hey, I want $6,000 a pound for this. I could pull something out of the cabinet and say, well, this is what I get for $3,200. Looks better than your $6,000 a pound stuff, doesn't it? Oh yeah, I guess it does. So we've used those. We had to. We became masters in disappointment. Every grower thinks it's $6,000 a pound.
Mhm.
Everybody thinks their shit is the best. Everybody grows the best stuff, but as we know, every grower grows differently, and sometimes the biggest problem is somebody who gets one crop successful and then doesn't know, and then successfully worse from there.
Right.
So I would basically tell them, and I learned to cite cannabis. So I could look at cannabis and say, okay, your room temperature is too high. You harvested this too early, about 10 to 2 weeks too early, and give them those pointers so that they could then go back and go back to their craft. And then they would show up 6 to 8 weeks later and be like, they were literally like school kids at show and tell. Here, take a look at it. Did it make the grade? Did it, because I could speak from authority, from understanding, from being a grower and having growing experience. They knew when I was looking at the cannabis that I was looking directly into their grow room. It would freak them out. They would be like, were you in my fucking grow room? Like, no, kid, I've grown enough pot that I know exactly what I'm looking like, what it looks like, as well as I've handled enough of this specific genetic that I can tell you that this is picked too early. And I can sometimes reach into the cabinet and pull out that same variety and show them how and why. And so that would then help them from that, 2,000 a pound to maybe 3,000 or 4,000 a pound. So that made a significant difference to an individual farmer back in the day. But again, that changed with 64 because then it instituted a distribution network, similar to the way alcohol does. Everything would have to go through a distributor. I would no longer be allowed to deal with the farmer directly. On top of that, I no longer had to pay for testing. I've spent millions of dollars on testing. Okay, I spent millions of dollars on testing just to get it to the point where we could figure out THC and CBD. Okay, that's lost money. That's just reality that I learned early on. And I had to struggle against my business partners and others to fight for it because like, we're not getting any money from this. How am I supposed to? And it's like, yeah, but we're putting out safe product. And over time, that's going to matter. Okay. Once people know they have safe, accessible product, the rest is going to sell itself as long as it's good cannabis. And we saw what happened prior to this pandemic. We saw Ebola, the lung situation happening due to cartridges and batteries that were low quality batteries, such as breathe-through batteries. So you should only be using batteries if you're going to be using them that are sealed. And if they are breathe-through, they have to be breathe-through at the top with holes on the top. On top of that, cartridges have to have the holes just above the threads as opposed to on the bottom. And these are technologies that have changed over time. But again, all this technology comes from one factory region in China.
Mm-hmm.
And so we know that they're putting out lead. And so what we found is that when people were using those breathe-through batteries, they were inhaling the off-gassing of the lead as well as the solder and other things that were in there. Then we found out that people were taking, cannabis that had failed testing and actually doing runs and then putting it in cartridges and selling it to people. So people are buying things that have high concentrations of pesticides and herbicides. And we saw people starting to come down sick, and then we started to see people dying because people were putting adulterants such as vitamin E acetate to cut the liquid. It would keep it the same viscosity, but stretch it out so that they could get more money from their carts. And we saw people take advantage of people's naivety, and people have died all across the United States. People had lung transplants. People are still in ICU. Some people will never get the function of their lungs back. So right. It taught us that testing was right to do. There is a reason and need for it, as well as we started to make the media aware that people are buying untested products. That's what the illegal market does, as opposed to the proper testing that we're doing consistently with every batch. I know illegal people who are doing a test of a batch and then posting that on every single thing that they put out. And people think that this is an actual tested product when the product that was tested has been gone for months. And this is just, a sticker on an actual cart, which has no representation. So I have seen a proliferation of the illegal carts all over the place. I've had people show me them. I've taken hits of them where I have actually tasted the sulfur still in them. People, when you have things like white powdery mildew. People do sulfur burns, where they actually burn raw sulfur in a garden to coat the leaves of the plants to keep the white powdery mildew from sticking to the actual plants or to kill it. And unfortunately, any residue that's used in the plant stays in the plant, sticks to the plant, sticks to the resin, gets in the resin heads, gets in the actual capitulated stalk, and you can't get rid of it. And that's why when I hit that CO2 pen, I could taste the sulfur because the sulfur is still in it. Not only that, it's at a highly concentrated form. Remember, it's called concentrates for a reason. We've taken all this and made it into this, which means the contaminants are as concentrated sometimes as the actual cannabis. And that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem that's cost people their lives and their livelihoods and potentially their ability to work or exercise ever again. So it reaffirms what we have stated all along, which is we need safe testing. We need safe, efficacious cannabis across the board and legal cannabis everywhere. And I know we're past the hour.
Yeah, that's okay. I just had one more thing I wanted to. I know that you went from California and you are now a multi-state dispensary. So where are you located? I know you went into Vegas first. Was that the first opening that you did after California?
Actually, it was in Incline Village, Nevada, which is it's right on Lake Tahoe, and it's just on the Nevada side. It's actually where the Bonanza house used to be. If you remember the show Bonanza, yeah, that's the old. They used to have tours and stuff in Incline Village, and now I think it's just it's more for skiing and stuff like that. So, and then I had to actually fight again in Las Vegas because Clark County decided to give out the dispensary permits to their friends in the casino business before the state issued them, and then the state issued them and I got them, and then I had to actually sue for the properties where they were, and it took a little longer. So Incline opened definitely before Las Vegas, but we're around the corner from the Wynn in Las Vegas on 410 East Twain. We couldn't get 420 East Twain. Lord knows we tried, but we couldn't. And we also have a production facility in Reno and a manufacturing facility in Sparks. So we actually grow and produce concentrates as well as manufacture for other manufacturers in the state of Nevada. So I have to keep everything in the state of Nevada. We still have to keep our little 10th Amendment reality. So everything I've done, I had to have investors, money, all that had to come from Nevada. So I have partners that are specifically to and in Nevada, whereas California, I'm still BPG and BPG is BPG. So it's being multi-state operator is not without its own challenges. We do not get the same product in Nevada as we do in California, except for a handful of products like, Bang, Kiva, that are knowns, and a few others. But for the most part, we're finding that most states are still establishing and trying to figure out who's their Coca-Cola, who's their Pepsi. The market is still yet to decide because it's still pretty neophyte and young. We've already seen various products come and go, and we will continue to see, but we're starting to see larger manufacturers like Keef Cola come from Colorado, and others start to launch products and product lines that aren't available in California. So also adding to the diversity of products that we see. We're dealing with Lagunitas, who has created a terpene infused adult beverage as opposed to a beer. It's actually a cannabis infused product. So we're even seeing large manufacturers of alcohol start to look at crossovers, as we've seen what's happened in Canada with Altria and various other large conglomerates on the world scale start to come into cannabis in Canada. So we're working here in the United States still. I'm on the board of the National Cannabis Industries Association, and we represent nearly 2,000 businesses around the United States, cannabis and ancillary businesses. So I work on the federal level lobbying, and we have national lobby days, which are usually in May. Last May, we were there lobbying for the banking bill, which got passed out of the House and are trying to get the Senate. So there's various things that we're working on, and now we're trying to we're actively working on the trying to get cannabis injunctive relief for being declared essential. We're trying to get involved in some of these bills at the federal level so that we will actually see some federal protection, because right now none of us can apply for any type of relief or any type of emergency relief, because that's all federal and it's all being done through federal banks. California has something where we will be able to go through a small business association, but unfortunately that situation still goes through federal banks. So the reality is we're on our own as usual, but we're still fighting at the federal level for that inclusion this week as we speak. So we're working on that. And all along, we also have on 420, we're doing the 420 Great American Sesh-In. So please join us if you have the opportunity. The link's out there. It's on social media. It's to be on Twitter as well as LinkedIn, Facebook. Keep an eye out. And if you get a link, spread it around. We're going to be on Twitch, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And we're raising money for, again, first responders. So if there's ever a time they need our help and support, this would be a time. So
That's
if you can join us.
We went ahead and we posted the link on our news feed so that students would be able to come in and participate. I just want to open it up for like maybe 5 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Since we do have a live event going, is there anybody here that wanted to ask Etienne personally any questions?
Do you mind if I medicate?
Go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Thanks. Go ahead, peoples.
This is Tom Kern. I'm a instructor in the law portion. First, just wanted to tell you, appreciate your journey and thank you for everything you've done. It's funny, you have been involved in things that we teach about, and you know, really everything you said rings true, and I certainly agree with you. Last week, or actually it was this week, it was Tuesday, for some of my clients, we hosted a virtual cannabis hangout, so we could stay connected and keep in touch. And you know, we had a showing from some of the largest to folks who just have a store or things like that. So we just wanted to get the perspective of what people were going through and dealing with and these different things. And it's interesting because, you know, you just brought up the Safe Banking Act, and that was really the biggest theme. You know, we talked about the lack of the CARE Act loans to the cannabis business and, quite frankly, ancillary businesses. And the feedback from the clients was, we don't, listen, federal government, you don't have to give us a dime. We don't want a dime from you. This is going to be, and guess what? We're going to solve your economic crisis. All we need you to do is sign the Safe Banking Act. We'll pump out 500,000 jobs. We'll help this economy recover, and it will cost you zero federal government. You don't have to give us any money. And that was kind of the theme throughout. I just want to know, you know, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, that's the reality. We're on our own, you know, and we have to beware when we're promoting economic prosperity, is that we are also looking through prohibition lenses. We're looking through the false numbers that prohibition has also provided us or perpetuated us. So what we're seeing here in California and other states is they were relying on those numbers and projecting on those numbers. And then when they rolled out our industry, they took too long. So the BCC, unfortunately, it takes 3 different industries prior, as they've now been consolidated to one. But we had 3 oversight regulation agencies that had to approve you. And that took longer. And so it took longer for people to get approved. So the money that the state of California was projecting didn't necessarily materialize because they didn't get all the distributors, manufacturers, or especially dispensaries up and going in ways and in times that they thought was going to be realistically doable. So be aware. I mean, yes, there is money and yes, there is economics, but just be aware of what those numbers are and realize that farming, like any other agricultural crop, is a race to the bottom. It's no longer a race to the top. The prohibition lenses that we existed under because of the risks that we took, physically risking our freedoms, have evaporated for the most part in these legal states. And because of that, these accountants are relying on those numbers that they arrived at or that they think they're going to arrive at. So just be aware of the balance between actually having an industry that can physically support those types of numbers versus using prohibition numbers that would have been, you know, we're calculating sort of the same numbers the way the government used to bust somebody and say, this is 4,000 pounds for this little clone, because that's the potentiality that it had, when in all reality, maybe that made an ounce, you know, not 3 pounds that the government said it is going to. So I would just caution, yes, there is economic realities. I mean, Colorado has shown and various others, but that's because they have a solid industry, they have a distribution, as well as supporting states and counties that allow it. Here in California, we have a problem is that part of the law that we allowed in '64 allows for dry counties. So if a county decides they don't want cannabis, they're out. Not only that, they do not benefit from any of the money that it gets. So if you're participating here in California in a county that has cannabis, you're reaping the rewards back. But if you're in a dry county, which is unfortunately millions of Californians exist in, they have to drive very far and, you know, have to spend more in gas and money that they would spend on cannabis because they usually stock up a little more from being so far away. So
Yes.
just be aware of the economics that are there, because there is also a lot of us here in California are struggling. I could not say that we would be able to survive on our own through this entire pandemic, all of us. Sure, we have a 20-year reputation, so we can survive, but those with a 1 or 2 or 3 or 5-year reputation are struggling. They're having a very hard time right now because, again, there's still a proliferation of illegal dispensaries. In LA, there's 3 illegal for 1 legal. So those projections are shot because they don't have the legal stores that were there prior to make the money, and they don't even know if those people that were prior were actually paying their taxes. So because there was actually no proper taxation and all those sort of things that had to be dealt with, specifically with California. And I know because I was the actual test gate for the state of California for taxing of cannabis. So it's a bigger question than that, Thomas. I appreciate your question. And there's just a lot of levels to that onion. And if you have an established state regulatory network with testing, et cetera, you could potentially say that. But I would, again, be aware of the potential numbers you're throwing out there. They might be inflated unless you can actually back up and know what those dispensaries and regions are making. So that's what I would caution you, is to find out realistically in your areas what they are necessarily doing, because they have to publish that. It's usually public information you can get access to via the state. At least you can here in California.
Yeah, there's a lot of overvaluation that's taken place here in the last few years. I certainly, what you're saying resonates.
And that's the same problem that we have here in California, because people still think it's the 4,000, or back when I started, it was 7,000 a pound. So that mentality, especially in some of the areas like Humboldt and Mendocino, that's changed because the reality is what they've had to deal with on the black market. But traditional market. I don't want to use the term. That's a derogatory term. So the illegal market, or as we know it as a traditional market. The traditional market still exists, and the 80% that didn't make the leap from 64, 21, that's where they are, because that's where we came from. So that's also a reality, is that the underground economy, it'll never, it'll never be fully, on credit or cards, because cash still rules. And if 80% of the market's still underground, not going to happen.
All right, we probably only have time for one more question. So is Dorothy, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I was wondering, would you know if there are any, since nonprofits can apply to foundations, are there any small private foundations so far or on the horizon that will support things like that?
No. Private funding is really kind of, finding philanthropists and people who believe in what you do. Unfortunately, this is the reality. And we created nonprofits, and only to see them be, kicked out of banks. I've been kicked out of 38 banks, my business alone. Okay. Wow. So when you come out and you state who you are, and even though you're illegal in the state, I just got kicked out of my personal bank for the first time. So a new front has been open. I just lost my bank, and for no reason. They could give me no explanation. And when I talked to the people high up, and I'm talking USAA, I'm a combat veteran. USA is like, get the fuck out. Yeah, just this week. So I lost my personal bank account. So that's the reality, is when it comes to anybody who's FDIC insured or any FDIC money, they can't deal with you. So you have to find private banks. You have to find local co-op banks, firemen's union banks and stuff like that. You have to, and on top of that, then keep 2 more in your back pocket for when you lose that one. Because I've literally lost my bank the night before payroll.
Thank you.
It's frustrating out there, ladies and gentlemen. And I wish there were traditional banks and methodologies that we could acquire support, because all of you have great ideas and you have the moxie and the gumption to get out there and do it. Unfortunately, we can't find the people consistently with the money to support us that believe in this. There are more coming to it. And there are things like the ArcView group and other groups that are funding businesses, or if you're creating a product or an idea, they're actually doing a sort of a Shark Tank style, fundraising reality, where people go out and they sit before a bunch of millionaires and actually pitch their ideas. So those groups are out there, but to find necessarily a nonprofit or something like that, they would lose their nonprofit status. Two, we acted, even though the laws in California said we had to act as nonprofits, we could not get nonprofit standing from the feds. So we would act as a nonprofit. So everything that would come in for us, we had to spend by December 31st at the end of that year. End of story, So we had to prove through our accounting that we were acting as a nonprofit, but you can't get that nonprofit status because it's federal. So we're still very much in this screwed up dichotomy, and it's not going to change anytime soon. Trump isn't going to change it. Biden is an anti-prohibitionist. He's definitely changed on some fronts, but I have no faith in his ability to get anything done. So that's why I belong to various organizations and national organizations. And I'm on the board to actually and actively go out and lobby on Capitol Hill. I lobby in Sacramento. I lobby in my local city. So, eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, ladies and gentlemen. You have to stay active. You have to stay plugged in and stay involved and connect with them personally. I connected them because I was a veteran. Okay. But you're a person, you're a human. You have your own story too, that you can connect to them on. And you don't have to be a veteran. You just have to be a human. And for every person who goes out there and speaks, you represent for anywhere from 1 to 10,000 people, depending on who and where you're speaking to. So your voice is very empowered and very empowering. The thing that I think we don't realize is the actual power of our own voice. It's easy for us to throw in and give up and go sit aside and go smoke a joint. It's another thing to find other like-minded people and organize them, pull them together for a purpose that brings everybody up together. And I've been fortunate to be around a group that's always done that. So that's kind of always been my modus operandi, is reaching out, lending a hand, doing what I can. So now here I am, I'm volunteering my time today, educating and talking to people. This is the way I can use my voice, that I can help others and empower them to realize that, yeah, one person can affect change. My father was the first blind lawyer in Louisiana. And he told me after the war, kid, don't get involved in stupid shit like that. You're never going to do nothing. You're never going to amount to anything, and you're never going to change anything. One person can't change a thing. And I proved him wrong. But I also found that he was right. One person can't change it, but a whole group of people who want that change can do absolutely anything. We've proved it. We proved it with Prop 215. We proved it with 64, and we'll prove it with the next one, because the 64 is a line in the sand. We still have to decriminalize between 18 to 20-year-olds because they were criminalized more. We have to fix these. There's things that we have to change within our 10th Amendment, but at the same time, we're working federally on changing it. So you can still tinker locally and still work on things statewide and nationally. It's possible. You just have to find your voice, plug into these organizations, volunteer. I volunteered for 2 years, putting in blood, sweat, and tears as my actual, as my money. And it's possible for you to do. You can't recreate everything I've done. It's impossible. I can't even believe the things I've done half the time, but I don't sit here and rest on my laurels and sit there and pat myself on the back and say, yay, we did it, we're done. Fuck no, we've got too much work to do, and people are still going to jail. Somebody's being locked up tonight, away from their families and friends, in neighborhoods that are right around you, which means we still have work to do. So plug in, find your voice, find your way to plug in, and you will find that other people will rally around you and believe in what you're doing, and you can affect the change, and you have to be the change that you want to see. You can't wait around for anybody else. If I waited around for the VA to get cannabis to veterans, I would have never had my cannabis. But I'm working through the VA and through senators and Congress people that we have actually changed the VA's policy, and we're going to change it even more so that all my brothers and sisters can have access and get recommendation in legal states where they have it, and not be treated like a second-class citizen and physically removed from the VA for using the medicine that helps them survive. And so find your voice, find your way to plug in. And I thank you very much, Lisa, and for what you're doing and taking our torch and holding it in the light the way that, the giants that I stood on their shoulders of. And now I pass my torch on to others for you to hold your light so that others can see, and hold your light on as long as you can, people. But when you're tired and you can't do it anymore, pass it on. Make sure there's others that can carry it on. This is a movement, so it doesn't happen overnight. It took us, as I said, 20 years of hard struggle to come at that overnight success of being deemed essentials. Okay. And we're not here. We're not happy about being here, because when we're done with this, we're going to take that and we're going to lobby for more change, because you deemed us essential, then you treat us essential. You give us banks, you give us the opportunities that we've been seeking for, and you stop denying us, and you give these other people their opportunities, because there's more enough pieces of this pie for everybody here and then some. So prepare yourself, educate yourself, and get ready and strap in, because it's a fucking ride, people.
Well, that was a great note to leave off on. How can everybody here find you? I want to give you a chance to plug your social media.
I am on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook on the letters ATN 420, which is the phonetic spelling of my name. I am, you can be reached at Etienne at mybpg.com. That is my email, which is, and that's basically how you can access me. I do on random Sundays, we'll do this show called Hash Church, of which Lisa is one of the people who moderates for us in the chats. So we've got literally hundreds of videos online of experts from around the world basically doing what we're here doing, except we're talking amongst ourselves as hash experts and cannabis experts, discussing the latest, the greatest, as well as usually sitting back and learning from Skunk Man Sam, who is actually one of the geneticists who he created skunk and haze and various other genetics. So we have some of the top geneticists as well. So for me, I get to learn. I get to teach a little, but for me, I'm always learning. And that's what we realize is there's not a lot of information out there. So I've learned directly word of mouth from my masters. So I'm very humbled to be on Sundays on Hash Church with the people I consider my masters. And on top of that, they're my friends and my compatriots and my brothers and sisters in arms. So just trying to do everything. What we've done allowed us to get to here. So what will you do to take us further, everybody?
Perfect. That's a perfect way. Thank you so much, Etienne. It was very informative. I think a lot of people got a lot out of this, and we've got it recorded. So anyone that missed this, we'll post it on the board for you, so you'll be able to see it. I can send you a link, maybe, Etienne, so you can take a look, and maybe I'll see you Sunday.
Absolutely. And if you want me to come back again, feel free to ask me. I'm a wealth of knowledge on various different subjects, as well as I try to stay pretty much up to date with what's happening. And I'm a kind of a cannabis visionary, so I'm kind of always looking over the horizon a bit. So I'm not trying to be way above people, but at the same time, that's just kind of my calling. I've been fortunate to see, and I've been using my prognostication as best as I can to push things further along the way. So that's allowed me to look over the curve a little bit, but at the same time, stay grounded in today, because that's where we are.
Thank you so much, guys. We'll see you 420 as well. We'll try to get online and watch all the events, and have a wonderful weekend and a great 420.
Absolutely. And to happy 420 to every single one of y'all. So spread the word. It's just an herb, as we used to say. So let's make it legal. Love y'all.
Bye-bye.